Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the May 28th Committee of the Whole meeting for the City of Lake Forest Park. I'm Larry Goldman, Council Vice Chair. Deputy Mayor Furutani, I believe, is running a bit late, but in the interest of time, I figured I would go ahead and get us started. So on this cow, we have a time limit, which is 7 o'clock is when our business meeting starts. And we have 3 items to discuss. And so do I need to do I need us to adopt the agenda? So
I move that we adopt an agenda.
It's been moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Right, we have an agenda. So our 3 items. The first deals with Planning Commission work plan tiers. The second deals with a letter to King County Metro regarding bus service. And the third, it involves a resolution for a potential levy. I figure we'll take each of those in turn. Councilmember Rosenau, were you going to lead the discussion on Planning Commission tiers?
Sure, and I just sent you and the PowerPoint that they used in their meeting. So if it's possible to pull up the 6th slide on that, just so we all are looking at the same thing. There were some edits to the language, and I asked Director Hoffman for the final version of it. So this is not exactly what they adopted, but it's close enough for, I think, our discussion purposes.
And just to give a bit of context while our clerk is pulling that up, the idea is for us to have a broader discussion. We had a joint meeting with the Planning Commission. And so are the Planning Commission's plans, are they in line with council's goals based on our meeting from a few months ago? So that's kind of the big picture for this discussion. Welcome, Deputy Mayor Furutani. Since you were gone, I took your spot.
Of course. Thank you very much for doing that. And I want to add that Director Hoffman will be here shortly. So,
Is this something, would it be better to move to one of the other topics first? Should Director Hoffman be here for this discussion of the?
given that it involves the Planning Commission, might be a good idea.
Okay, well, in line of that, also, do you want me to turn it over to you to?
Oh, no, carry on.
Okay, so the second item is a letter. I drafted a letter to King County Metro regarding Route 372. Sorry, I'm making you jump through all sorts of hoops tonight. The gist here is that come this fall after the World Cup, both Sound Transit and Metro are changing their bus service. And so the 522, instead, it'll go from Bothell, Kenmore, LFP, but instead of going down into Lake City, it'll turn onto 145th. Basically, it'll be running the Stride route, even if it's not Stride technically yet. It'll be Stride in all but name. At the same time, Metro is rerouting the 372, so it will not serve LFP anymore. It'll come up through Lake City and also go down 145th. And the challenge there is that creates a hole in service, and that there will no longer be any buses during the day that get you from North Shore communities, you mean LFP, Kenmore, Bothell, and Lake City. The transfer will be awkward at best because they're also deleting the bus stops at the intersection of 145th and Bothell Way. And so it'll just add time for anybody who is trying to, basically who isn't necessarily going to link. Metro, the county council has adopted these changes about a year ago with not very much fanfare. Sound Transit Board has adopted theirs, but since they haven't been implemented yet, I think there's an opportunity for us to do some lobbying. So my goals for tonight were to just sort of introduce the letter and then ask about strategies. Do we want this to be a letter just from our council? Do we want to bring in some neighboring jurisdictions? I know at least one council member in Kenmore who would be supportive of this, but also reaching out to our colleagues in Shoreline, in Bothell. Do we want to add on, community groups? Lake City, I think it would be hard to get anyone from the Seattle Council. It's a much bigger beast, but if there's Lake City advocacy organizations that might be interested. So that's kind of the goal for our discussion is, what do you think of the letter? And also, what should our outreach strategy be?
And I will say I have heard some expressions of support, whether they would sign or not, but at least sympathy with the issue from Seattle City Council members as well.
And so you can find it, it's on pages 3 and 4 of the packet. It is in very early draft form. And so really, I just wanted to focus on the content. Don't worry about things like, the formatting or anything like that. Just what are your thoughts on the content? So I'm happy to have our roundtable discussion. Deputy Mayor.
So, yeah, thanks for taking the initiative on this, Vice Chair. I think it's a great letter. I think it's a really overdue letter. We really need to advocate for this service because, as the letter points out, it's really hard for folks in Lake City to get out of their food and pharmacy desert to get to, for instance, our Safeway here or the Ostroms in Kenmore. It's also equally difficult for those of us who have business in Lake City to get there easily once the proposed changes have taken place. And further, the thing that really I think is a great what is the word, analogy illustration you made is that this 148th state or 185th station should be sorry, the 148th station on Link should be treated as one point in a triangle, and that idea that basically Kenmore, that say the North Shore area and us form one point in the triangle, Lake City forms the other point, and then the Link station is the third point. The fact that we need service in all three directions. It does actually very well define our transportation desert too. So I thought that was kind of nice too, but we'll address that at some other point. But I love the letter.
I think that this can be part of addressing that, like having these conversations and pushing for these sorts of constructive changes. The other thing that I think is important about this is that there is that very hard boundary at the city line, which doesn't exist for people who operate anywhere through this region, and that those bus routes also serve anywhere from UW-Bothell all the way down to the Seattle campus, and people ride back and forth, and it's important for the community. So I think whether it's, there are a number of solutions that I could envision, but having something where the thing that I've been saying to people is something where at least two buses stop at the same stop, so that even if one bus doesn't get you where you're going, you don't have to walk across the street. You don't have to across a busy street in whatever the weather is of whatever, different ages, different abilities, all of that. I think it's important to provide that sort of access.
Right, Councilmember Riddle.
And while I'm definitely not, a transportation engineer, I think providing them some guidelines of some options that would help. Another idea is that some of the, whatever 72 route can be local routes rather than expresses that go straight to the link. Maybe there's a few in the morning and a few in the afternoon to handle those level of connections. And there's other ways I think that they could get creative that doesn't completely redesign their entire system, that really helps meet this gap that we're seeing in service and the food desert and all the other bits of how to get between these two regions.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Good.
I think that the letter is very nice. It's very nice, but I think I think that it could be a little firmer. That's me, but I really like it. And I do think that there's a lot of groups that would be behind this. For example, there's a lot of professors at UW that are stuck now. I know people that are jumping in their cars now and driving because it's they can't get south. And it's defeating the purpose. I think what we have now is defeating the purpose of what they're trying to do. They're trying to get everybody on the rail, but people need to go shorter distances as well without having to walk. It's been a real big impact, I think.
And we should have leverage. Their job is to make good transit. So I think we should have leverage. If we say to them, you're making transit worse, how can we make it better?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of
the
power.
suggestion is really good, but I think to emphasize the impact to all of these people that, I have a neighbor that lives in Lake Forest Park and works down there and can't really get there now. So and she's older, so it's hard for her to walk.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, so next steps then. I like the idea of, as Councilmember Good was saying, of actually soliciting some community partners, maybe even individuals within the community. What are you thinking about doing?
I'm totally open. I will admit, policy wonk is I think one of my strengths. Outreach is less so, but I'm open to suggestions for if there's particular groups that would be of interest.
Well, what about if we started with the groups that we have that are attached to us, like the Planning Commission or the stewardship, and see if we can get them to buy in, and then possibly reach out to, like you said, the other communities, the city councils. But I think, we could start with our own groups that we have attached to the city.
So perhaps a strategy might be like if each of us, like, if, for instance, I have a contact, I have a contact on the Kenmore City Council, I could reach out to them. If someone had a good contact in Bothell and Shoreline, Councilmember Rosenau, you're the liaison to the Planning
Yeah.
Commission, so perhaps you could bring it to them.
Sure.
But I guess if we each were to pick one or two contacts up, Administrator Hill has his hand up.
I'd be happy to reach out to the city managers in surrounding cities, because it's gonna have to go through their entire council, so to send it to their staff and have them reach out
Yeah.
to their mayors and see if there's a.
And- And if you think that's a better strategy than going out to an individual council member here or there, basically, I'm happy with whatever seems to be the most effective way to bring in a coalition.
I guess that's the question. Are the cities signing or would individuals be like, I could see both paths.
That's gonna be up to each city. I mean, if the city wants to sign on, great. If they get to know to individual council members, fine. This is the same process that we follow, like when we go for build grant dollars at federal level. We just reach out to each city management group, their lobbying liaisons, Jim Hammond over at Shoreline, and they do the legwork to find support or lack of support, and then individuals that want to sign on. So it'd be easy to do that for you.
Councilmember Riddle and then Deputy Mayor.
Tracy was up
Okay,
first. I
Deputy
got
Mayor,
her
and then.
hand raised.
I was going to say that I asked the wrong question, obviously. What's the timeline you're looking for to send this letters? Because of course, outreach will take some time.
What I would say maybe, in a pretty quick turnaround, if any of you have specific language suggestions, if you have ways you want to strengthen the letter, yep, send them. Is it acceptable for people to send me edits to me, or is that a public meeting issue?
Thinking. So,
Or maybe if the letter, at this point, is it better if the letter lives with a staff member now? Like, is this far enough along that way there wouldn't be a serial meeting issue?
You would still create a serial meeting issue.
Mm.
Even if it was sent to a staff member individually. Because you're all talking about the same subject.
Well, so far, Councilmember Rosenau and I have kind of done the most of this letter. So maybe if one more council member expressed, I think Councilmember Good expressed interest.
Well, you know what, you remember the letter that you wrote before?
Yes.
I like a lot of what was in that letter was very good. I thought that was the most eloquent way to explain the problem that losing the bus does. So maybe incorporating some of that where appropriate, because I thought that was excellent.
Yep, I can plagiarize myself then.
Yeah.
And I also recommend maybe some stronger language. Just being a bit more bold. And then if there's any sort of personal stories that you know of, people who are personally impacted, I think that would be, if it fits within the timeline, that would be an amazing thing to put in this and to create a human story that they have to look at rather than just words.
Okay. So I can work on that in the next week or so. Deputy Mayor.
So do you want to formally establish a subcommittee then of 3 people, 3 council members?
Sounds like if Councilmembers Good and Rosenau are interested, that we could be a subcommittee on this. I think the goal would be for our first meeting in June to bring it back. And at that point, council could decide, do we want to formally vote to make this a council letter versus having it just as individual sign-ons? And then I think that would impact, or it would influence how Administrator Hill reaches out to other cities.
Did anybody reach out to Rod?
I've spoken with him about this. So not about this letter, but the subject. He's sympathetic to the concerns, and his suggestion was, why don't they just extend the 372 for another year and see how it all shakes out, which is a fine solution.
Essentially the solution that's in the
Yeah.
second page of the
Well,
letter.
Maybe he could provide some push.
And then I guess we can talk about this as a subcommittee, but do we want to shop this around as a draft to other people who might sign it and get their feedback before
Or
we
can we?
finalize it?
Can we shop it?
I mean, we are not part of a public meeting with them, right? We can talk to them as much as we want. We just can't talk to each other.
And maybe that's a question for Administrator Hill, that I think the letter is probably 80 to 90% complete. And so is that enough for you to start sort of informal outreach to your counterparts in other cities?
They're gonna want to see the final one, I've found. So yeah, I can reach out to them and just see their level of interest, but they'll want to before they move forward to
Which-
decide whether they sign up.
Makes sense. So maybe a two-prong approach of Administrator Hill, if you do some informal outreach, subcommittee work, what day is our first meeting in June?
10th, I think.
The 10th. So let's aim for we'll bring it back. I think there's a work session on the 10th, so maybe second touch at the work session, and then we could see
My bad, 11th.
11th then?
Yeah.
Also good. But yeah, bring it back for the 11th and see if we're ready to take a formal vote.
Should we float a draft at Seashore?
Yeah, that would be another opportunity. Our Seashore meeting is a week from tomorrow, which is the 5th. I can reach out to Genevieve, not Amanda is going to be here tonight for the Pride Transit proclamation. I could reach out to her. Okay, so it sounds like we have a plan moving forward. Administrator Hill.
Say as far as that organization, I think we found in the past that your time on site combined with their ability to sign on to that.
Yes, it would be too short notice for the Seashore to officially sign on. So I can have a conversation with Amanda if she thinks it's a valid agenda topic or not.
But at least it gets it in front of people for discussion. And
Okay. So with that, I want to make sure we have time for the other topics, and I see Director Hoffman is here. So now let's move on to our second item, which is the Planning Commission. And now, Clerk McLean, if you could pull up the slide that Councilmember Rosno was referring to. Again, just a reminder, we're just sort of having that discussion, what are the three tiers that the Planning Commission is looking at? Where are they landing? Is that in alignment with council member goals? So, Councilmember Rosno,
Yeah.
take it away.
so these were things that the planning commission members, they had a small subgroup that met and sort of hammered these out as paths that they might pursue, and had a vote. They edited some of this, so this may not be the final language, so we can circulate this. But there were a few of the members who were there who supported that third option, to really think broadly about affordability, including limits on density and other bigger factors that get beyond just cleaning up the existing code. Option one, I think, is much more sort of finalizing some of the conversations that Planning Commission had last year about things like frontage and other things within the existing code, and sort of getting that off of their plate after having been working on it for a while. And the middle one was meant to be based on some of the conversations we all had at the retreat, and a summary of where that had sort of landed. So there were a couple of votes for option three. There was a majority for option one, and the discussion, as that note says, is that they are sort of a nested set, that proceeding on option one could be a stepping stone towards moving on to a more comprehensive look at it. A question that I had asked them at the time, and that I've continued to think about, is when I talk to developers or talk to affordable housing policy types, the biggest thing that they will talk about as a barrier to affordable housing is simply the cost of building, the cost of land, which is we can't do anything about as a policy matter. The only thing we can do about it is the density part of splitting that cost across more units in the end, which is not. And so I asked, when we talk about unnecessary barriers to middle housing development, would that affordability, that cost barrier be within the scope? And they were saying no, not within option one, but that option one, if and when option one leads to options two and three, that part of the conversation. Oops, I talk with my hands and sometimes I bump microphones. That's where that could lead.
Thank you. So colleagues, do you have questions for Councilmember Rosenau about kind of like what the Planning Commission is considering?
I have a question. So is this citywide or is this in specific zones?
They did not discuss specific zones as part of this. This was more in there, if you remember, in the work plan that they sent us that we adopted, there were several items, including one that was this affordability. The third of them was affordability, broadly speaking, and moving some of those parking lot items that didn't get to in the middle housing revisions last year and moving those to the table. So it wasn't at that level of detail.
Well,
But it could be.
It might need to be, because I think that what we hear loud and clear from our citizens is that they don't want big side-by-side sixplexes up in their neighborhoods. So maybe it's better to define zones or do more public outreach. So you're not, because I'm also sensitive of the reasonable use exception and critical areas, steep slopes, things like that, because we have a lot of, I don't think other than someone building here at Town Center, we're going to be building any sort of meaningful affordability within 3.5 miles of a city. It would be concentrated here where there would be more incentive, or you could zone it to where you could do everything that you're talking about.
Yeah. And this is something where I spoke to someone at Arch who had done a modeling exercise for Kenmore a year ago, working on some of these same questions of like what pencils anymore. And they sent me some of the data that they had from that, and I've been playing with it in a spreadsheet that is not quite ready to put up on a screen today, but just for my own purposes, trying to figure out, what would pencil on like a 1/4 acre lot or a 1/2 acre lot if at current prices for a lot with a house on it, which is what we have, and we're at like 500% AMI to put a house on it, right? You tear down $1 million house and you put a $2 million house. That's not improving affordability. And then if you tear down $1 million house and put $2 million duplexes, which is again, like for their profit margins, what they need to do, you've improved supply, but not affordability. And that is middle housing, right? It meets that criteria, but it doesn't improve the affordability of the project. So it's not until you get to a quadplex or more that you start even getting below 100% AMI from that really simplistic model. And before you even start grappling with the actual real world complexities of where could we build that? Where would that, where would it fit into the context of a neighborhood? But we're building 5,000 square foot houses. And so part of the question is, do you slice that as one 500% AMI house or some smaller number of units or some number of units that bring the average affordability within the same envelope, within the same look?
Councilmember Riddle.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are definitely creative ways we can increase density that doesn't take away from what we expect our neighborhoods to look like. There are giant square monoliths that are single family homes. And in reality, if there were 4 units within that home, you would never really know the difference. Other than perhaps parking, but some of these have giant parking driveways anyways. So I think in my mind, pushing back on the Planning Commission saying, hey, let's look at, as Councilmember Rosenau was saying, what's the kind of like, what can we do to build a giant single family home, and what else can we do within that envelope that would be reasonable? Some instances that I've been thinking about is like maybe the facade has to have no more than 2 doors. So you don't have a facade with all these, entries, or maybe no more than one door on any street front facade. Things that will help create a little bit more of bringing the designs into the fabric of the community without sacrificing the fact that you can get, maybe 2 ground floor units and maybe 3 or 4 second floor units of much smaller size that would be the affordable units. And it's the same envelope and similar, not quite the same square foot construction cost as doing a single family home.
Deputy Mayor.
Well, thanks, and thanks, Josh, for your work with the Planning Commission. I think the key thing here is that I'm cognizant of both Director Hoffman and the Planning Commission's time. They submitted a work plan to us, and recall they were kind of slammed for time anyway. And I want to recognize Councilmember Good's concern about particular zoning in different kinds of neighborhoods. Honestly, basically, I think option 2 is probably the best thing because there you have the room to do option 1, which is the cleanup, plus basically consider offering pre-designed plans, for instance. But then option 2 also basically doesn't incentivize big A or small A affordability. We got a problem on both ends, really. So the point is basically, I think, be giving the Planning Commission enough room to breathe so they can come up with their own proposals, and they can start with the outreach in terms of what's appropriate for which neighborhood and things like that. I think that might be the best route to go.
Can I just clarify one thing? One of the items that they adjusted as they were editing the language here was that the line about pre-designed plans, they separated out because really that's quite a different workload than cleaning up the existing zoning.
That's why I called it
So
out.
listen, yeah, so
Yeah.
just to clarify, it's probably obvious.
Yeah.
And the other thing I will say, when you asked at our last meeting whether we should have this as an agenda item, I was first sort of demurred because out of that same spirit of, they've had these cleanups on their plate for a while now, and I do want them to have time to get through it, but I also feel a certain urgency about getting past that as
do we
well.
all.
Councilmember Riddle.
So I'm opposed to pre-approved plans. I think that is, I think, in a way, the most uncharacteristic, to have the same house plan multiple places. Suggestions of what would be appropriate would be, I think, good. I mean, there are a lot of pre-built plans out there. We just know that our geometry and terrain is just different. And so I don't even know if we had pre-approved, pre-designed plans, if they'd ever get used. And now we've put a lot of effort into something that really doesn't work. And if
Maybe for ADUs and
we,
things like that.
yeah. And I was just gonna say, unless we're providing something that will actually function as a profitable endeavor for a commercial enterprise, it's not going to happen at all. And if we keep taking these tiny baby steps, we're wasting the Planning Commission's time, we're wasting staff time, and we're not going to get a single thing built. I think either we go bigger in creating something that commercial enterprises will want to do while keeping it within what would be acceptable in Lake Forest Park. I think anything other than that is just a waste of our staff and volunteers' time, to be honest.
Councilmember Good.
I agree with Tracy about the option number 2, and also going big in Lake Forest Park is there's only one location to go big.
Well, we're
And-
middle housing big, so we're talking of like 4-plexes, 5-plexes. We're not talking
But
about.
the only way
big
that
thing.
what you're talking about is doing multi-storied homes. When people age, they're not going to want to go up and down the stairs. So that means that you're having housing that is going to be for younger people. I think it
I
needs more
disagree
outreach.
wholeheartedly.
So I want to make sure, since we do have limited time, I don't want us to get too far in the weeds on this. I think really, at least my goal for putting this as an agenda topic for tonight was is there a council consensus on which of those 3 options we feel the Planning Commission should aim for? And leave it to the Planning Commission to work out the details. I haven't given my speech yet, but basically I kind of agree that I think either option 2 or 3, that I think just going around the code is not going to be enough to actually spur the middle housing and the affordable housing we need. So I do think we need to go further. I think option 2 seems, again, trying to balance what we need versus what staff and planning commission bandwidth is available. Option 2 seems to be a good compromise to me.
And I'd like to clarify, go big wasn't about the size of the house. Go big was about the effort we're putting into it. So I just want to be very clear, I'm not advertising the 12 plexes in neighborhoods.
That's a
Go
good
big
thing.
is the amount of effort that we're going to put into it. We can either put tiny little steps and not get anywhere. We could put one big effort and really make a difference. And that's the go big I was talking about.
Councilmember Rosenau.
One thing that I've also been looking back at is a year and change ago, there was the Leland Consulting, the middle housing study that went back to the Planning Commission in March last year, that talked about some additional options, including the frontage question that they did take up. But there's also questions about lot coverage ratios, as well as where ADUs, should we allow ADUs in the front lot as well as in behind the building? And then the broader questions of incentives and, development bonuses for either for height or FAR or for lot coverage. That lot coverage itself could be a bonus for affordability. That there are things like that which to my mind don't fall within option 1. And probably falls within option 2. Probably doesn't need us to go all the way out to option 3, but option 3 may focus more on some of the specific things that would address that. And I don't know if there was past discussion that we want to revive about any of those things to bring back.
Do you want to pause for one moment? I noticed that Director Hoffman shifted his seat to one closer to the podium. I was just wondering, was there anything you wanted to add to this discussion?
I think the agenda item at Planning Commission was to gain traction. Every time they examine this agenda item, they have this very discussion. And it's very broad. And so while there was broad support to do the entire, everything that's said there, their final vote represented, let's do option 1. It doesn't preclude 2 and 3, but it's a good starting point. If during that process we find there are advantages individually or collectively to move forward into 2 and 3, they would gladly do so. And the entire discussion showed support for option 3. They would like to explore all of that and right size it, if that's the right term, for Lake Forest Park. But I think in the end, the vote was taken and the majority went with option 1 because it was the best understood and they could gain traction and do something this year.
So I do want to be mindful of time, so I just kind of want to summarize the conversations that I've heard. It sounds like there's definitely support for option 1. It sounds like there's more support for option 2 than not option 2. But within the Planning Commission, concerns about bandwidth. So I guess my question is, what can we do as the council or as individual council members? Now, if the broad sense of the council is option 2 and the Planning Commission is concerned they won't be able to accomplish that, how can we help them get there? Is that a fair summary of our discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pro option 3, but I also understand I'm in the minority.
So my sense is that, I mean, they're busy, they're volunteers. We heard at the joint meeting, they've got a lot of other things going on in all of their lives. And so I'm comfortable letting them take the position, not reopen the big discussion so that they have time to get into the actually doing option 1 and move that off their plate. One thing that I think we can do to help them that we heard at the joint meeting also was if there are specific things in the Leland report, if there are specific things that if we really want them to talk about sixplexes, to choose an example, purely hypothetical example, if there are specific things that we would like them to work on out of the universe of affordable housing policy levers that exist out there, I think if we can identify a consensus here and say, once you get through these things, we would love you to look at this, I think they would be receptive to that.
I would like to make a proposal. I know we're really big on these subcommittees, but basically create a subcommittee among us to go through the plan, what the planning commission has discussed so far, go through the Leland report. And the subcommittee would basically set up maybe 6 or 8 parking lot items, bring it to our next cow. Then at the cow, we would reach a consensus of those 6 to 8 parking lot items. Maybe we pick 2 of them. And that is essentially the consensus of the council. Go to the planning commission and say, these 2, we want to see progress on them. Does that sound like a reasonable plan?
Yeah.
So then I will call for volunteers who would like to be on this subcommittee.
I feel like I always volunteer for subcommittees, but
Me too.
eventually it will come to me and as liaison, and so I'm happy to hold back.
I'm happy to be on it.
I think all 5 of us are happy to be on it, but we need to narrow it down to 3. So
Okay,
could,
So
You
if
do
you-
it,
if you'd
Tracy.
like to-
I'm
Okay.
always, yep.
Right.
I want to make one more comment, and that's just about the affordability, or when does a developer have the line drawn, when they can build or not. So the lot next to me originally was 20 some odd units, then it got down to 11. That's the lowest for that size of lot that they find that's profitable.
Hmm.
So just as a, it's 11 units
Yeah.
on that, and that's, I don't know what size that lot? Yeah. So,
back to the subcommittee. I think
It's
Councilmember Rosano would be a good fit because he is the liaison to the planning commission.
Or I could hold back and eventually
Yeah.
I can be part of the discussion after others have kicked it around. I'm happy. I'm certainly happy to be part of the conversation.
Okay. So show of hands, who is interested? So let's see,
Interested, I would
1,
be too.
2, I see 2.
well, Tracy was.
It was, but I'm dropping out because there's clearly passionate people here. so-
Okay, so then we'll say council members Rosano, Riddle, and I will be the planning commission work plan subcommittee. A lot of words to say that. All right.
Which
We're the planning commission.
you mentioned him twice.
Oh, no, Rosano, Riddle, and myself.
Riddle, okay, got it. Okay, sorry.
Yes, and then myself, Rosano, and Good will be the King County Metro.
Right.
And now let's move on to our
Can we
third.
get a copy of this sent to us?
Sure, I sent it to you so you can,
Okay.
or if you have a more updated version and you want to circulate that instead, that's fine.
Before your email, we requested that Monday of David. He hasn't seen the email yet.
Okay.
Now it's Thursday, so it's on its way.
All right, and now our third agenda item, I'll turn it over to Budget Chair Riddle to talk about proposed levy resolution.
Yes, so we got really far in understanding what it is that we need to do. And so this is just pulling back the resolution from last year so that we can kind of see what are the areas where we would have to change things based off of, different dates and so forth. And also just to make sure that we are generally in agreement that this is the language we'll probably be going forward with. So this is the one where we do mention the public safety services and the increases to that. We do mention some specific items that would be covered that I believe are still relevant. It's police staffing, training and equipment, 911 dispatch. I am on page 7. I don't know if you have packet numbers there.
That's page 3 of the resolution itself. Yeah.
Thank you. A little farther down.
There you go.
There you go, right in the middle, the bullets. 911 dispatch, emergency management services, jail services, prosecution and public defense costs. We continue to see that grow since this was last written. Crisis intervention and mental health diversion programs. So those kind of were the ideas that would be covered under this. We all know that there's a structural gap we're trying to fill. But this is where we see the most imminent cost increases and concerns right now. I'm trying to think, there was, and then of course, we've got it listed for November 10th for the general election on here. So that is the assumption made on this. Anyway, so just open to questions. Yes.
I'm the money is, they brought up fungibility during the last levy in discussion. There was a lot of people talking about fungibility, that the money, they felt duped in a way, that it was specified as for, public safety, because that made them feel like if that they would lose public safety, when I think in reality, we're using it more broadly. And I'm just concerned that if we're using it more broadly, we might want to have broader language in why we're using it, so people don't feel misled.
I saw the finance chair director step up, but I mean,
That's just
it's,
thought.
we have a gap.
Mhm.
We have to fill that gap. And I think the thing that is 30% of our general fund, 35% of our general fund is police. That's where the cuts would come from. No matter what anyone else thinks, that's the only place we would get a significant amount of revenue carved, or expenditures, I mean, carved away. Therefore, that is what we're protecting here. And I believe that. So anyways, I think I saw a hand.
Oh,
Do you want to, thank you.
We need to say that it's function. These are all related to public safety. Majority of this, as you see it there, 9/11 dispatch, jail services, prosecution, public defense. Those you can't cut. You can cut some of your service. You could get rid of your participation in racer. You could get rid of MTO. You could not fill officer positions when they come up. That these are all, reason that these were all listed is these are all part of safety. And as you make additional decisions on public safety, whether that's with officers, cameras, those costs are going to go up. And these costs are all related to the general fund, which is where the city has the issue with revenue.
Well, to clarify, I mean, I know that this is a necessary thing, and I'm just saying that when people see it, they think that that is the only place you can spend the money. So I don't know if that's a true or not true statement.
That is,
Okay.
you adopt this
Mhm.
and you put that language before the voters, you say within that explanatory statement, that this is what you're spending it on. You spend it on something else and you become accountable.
Yeah,
And
okay.
not just like city staff, the boards will step in, the state
Okay.
will step in, because they're not spending money when you say spend.
And I would say the money that we're bringing in from our savings to cover the gap is covering this.
Mhm.
Because a lot of these are newer increases that kind of hit us,
Yeah, I know where
but they're
they're,
continuing, but this is what the savings money is paying for. And this would be just asking to have that covered by a levy increase.
so this is a sort of a
so-
parallel question, I think, to what you're asking, that I had certainly had conversations last year with people who said, well, I obviously support having public safety. We've got a great police department, but do we need more? And they misunderstood what was happening here as increasing that budget rather than holding it steady. And I wonder if there is any way that that this can be phrased or tweaked to clarify that it is not it's not meant to increase that budget. It's meant to hold
Support
that
it.
budget stable relative to inflation and relative to other factors that are inflation in those services, but not like we're not this is not intended to hire substantially, to increase the size of the police department, to buy more new vehicles. Like it's not meant to do that. It's meant to sustain what we have. And that I don't know I don't know exactly how to wordsmith that, but I feel like that may clarify some of the confusion that people had. And with 19 votes,
Yeah.
right, a little bit of confusion goes a long way.
Tracy, if I may,
Hmm?
it's in the whereases,
Yeah.
so there's a way for us to
Say.
pull that into our communications. So right there in the middle right now, approval of a levy lid lift ballot proposition would help maintain current levels of public safety services.
Yeah, I wonder if there couldn't be a sort of in this item, section 4, some extra sentence that says something. I don't know what, again, I have not wordsmithed it. I just wonder, legally, could we, like, is it actually a practical thing to do? And is it worth doing on a policy or political level?
And
And I'm sorry, Tracy, you say what I wanted to
that's
say?
exactly what
Okay.
I'm saying. And I'll echo that if it's legally permissible, to say something like the funds revenue generated by this levy shall be used to maintain service levels for public safety services, including but not limited to blah, blah, blah. So to make it clear that this is not an expansion levy, this is a maintaining the status quo levy,
Yeah.
which I think that that is our goal as a council, and
Yep.
just make sure that communicates to the public.
Administrator, is that something we can run through our attorney and see if that's an issue?
And then I could raise another question. Actually, it's right there on the middle of the screen, right before section 4. It's the inflation bullet point. And so right now it just says that it'll be increased based on the CPI. My question is, do we want to put a cap on that? Do we want to say increased by CPI up to a limit of, say, 5%? Or are we happy with it just as is?
I was reminded that I don't think we can do that, which is why it's just the CPI.
I think that's correct. I think we did have to take the cap off per the levy admin's office. They said that language, if you wanted to institute basically parameters such as those, that the council did have the option to basically kind of do that. But it had to be internally on an annual basis, and to have the language within that actual adopted ordinance, it was not an option, resolution, excuse me.
I think I remember that.
I remember people being confused about that in the last, like there was language about that in the last levy, and people were interpreting it and inverting the meaning in some cases just because of the trying to do legalese on your own can be tricky. And it again, with 19 votes, every little bit of confusion. So I would be inclined to just keep this as simple as humanly possible.
I just want to be mindful of that. We did receive a comment from Julian Anderson,
Yes.
and he does share sentiment with a lot of other people. So I was just thinking of his comments.
I do,
Director Bond.
for the record, I do want to state that there are a lot of these costs that are listed are not within the city's control. So that's where I think there's a big level of misunderstanding or lack of understanding, is that jail costs are not something that we can just cut. We can't minimize it. We can't, we don't have the ability to squeeze it, tighten our belts. It has just gone up substantially, and it's a cost that we just have to, at a certain, we have to absorb. It's just not an option of whether or not to pay those expenses. Your prosecution, as has been brought forward to you, that contract hasn't gone up in years. And then due to the expansion of traffic safety, et cetera, the cost has definitely significantly gone up. Due to the legislative changes, the public defense costs, that's not within our control. These are directed initiatives that basically come down that have a direct cost, but the city is not, it's outside of our control to say we're going to limit it. No, we now have to comply with the new law that has been set forward for us, and it comes with a dollar tag secured right to it. And that's where I'll stop.
Just
Councilmember Bibb.
for to help clarify those concerns, I think it would be really good to, if this goes out, when it goes out to the city people or our residents, that we explain just that, like these, like jail service, they're contracted. You know, we know that they are, but people may not know that they are because they're not paying attention to every meeting that we have. So I think explaining those categories and how they're funded and you know, we're at the mercy of, might help.
And I think that it does speak to what we were just saying about this. The goal of this is to maintain our level of service, that we want to maintain, we have to maintain having a contract with the local jail, to have a public defender, to have a prosecutor. And
At
so
911.
even whether those costs are under our control or not, and they're
Good
not under
answer.
our control, we still need to maintain those services. So so I think we're all in agreement about the goal. It's just a matter of how do we communicate this to the public as clearly as possible. Right. Any other feedback about the levy resolution?
I think the only thing that I wanted to add, not specifically about the resolution, but just in general, is that, I mean, we have some experience now with how we communicate with the community. We are bringing up more in-person touches with council. I would be against bringing on any consultant to assist us. I think we have the history of what got us to where we are today, and the community wants to hear from us and from people here in.
I second.
Is it, so I just wanted to make that clear. I'm not making any suggestions that we bring on any consultants to get us through this process.
And to your point, I don't think that's even an option. I'm pretty sure at this point in the calendar that any consultant would turn us down for a November. So, but I also think we've gained enough experience from last year that I do believe we have the materials, we can spool up our website again. So yeah, I think we have the experience and the passion to do this one ourselves.
And we know the community.
All right, any other comments about the levy?
All I have.
If not, then that brings us to the end of our cow agenda, and we have a whole 8 minutes before our business meeting. And so I will go ahead and call us adjourned. And thank you, Deputy Mayor, for deferring to me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
Good job.
Vice Chair,
yeah, we'll see you in this same place in 8 minutes.
8 minutes.